found the crate waiting for me by the gate when I arrived at work. Last year, before the layoff started, we had about 36 people working at the facility. There used to be a whole department tasked with collecting seeds and samples and communicating with other researchers across the world. Had anyone from that team still been around, they would have handled the crates, but they weren't. The acquisition team was the first one to go when our funding started to get trimmed. Soon enough, the other departments ended up getting weeded out as well. The crate had no shipping information or instructions attached. Only a hastily scrawled address of the research facility written in black marker that suggested the crate had reached its destination. The box was difficult to get my arms wrapped around, yet it was surprisingly light. Unsure of whether I was going against protocol, I carried the crate inside. It was my first week working at the facility alone. There were gardeners who would come in twice a week to take care of the manual aspects of running a botanical garden, but even they were unsure how long their employment would last. When we'd bump into each other in the atrium, they would ask about their contracts. As with most questions, I would defer to Dr. Moss. Even before the layoffs, he was the most senior member of staff. Whatever explanation he provided to the gardeners seemed to ease their minds. He was good at keeping people calm. He was good at a lot of things. Before I opened the crate, I thought about calling Dr. Moss. He had been let go just a week prior and kindly offered me with his personal number in case I ever came across something I had trouble with. A mysterious crate arriving at the facility seemed well within the scope of his offer, but I didn't call. I had already called him thrice over the past week concerning questions that I probably would have found answers to on my own if I'd thought a bit harder. I didn't want to make my constant pleas for help a habit, and the old man deserved a calm retirement. Once I had my morning coffee, I pried open the mysterious crate. The smell was the first thing that hit me. I've been working with preserved samples for long enough to make the stench of formaldehyde or ethanol unnoticeable, but what was inside of that box didn't smell of chemicals at all. It smelled of old sweat. The contents of the crate were even more perplexing. At first, I thought it was only a collection of shrubbery and flowers, but on closer inspection, I found the plants to be embedded in a blob of porous grey flesh. The plants stemming from this strange mass proved to be even more confusing. I am unqualified for most of the tasks that the layoffs have brought me, but identifying plants has always been my strong suit. Yet even with years of education and practice, I couldn't recognise a single one of the flowers before me. I checked the crate once more for any clues about the nature of its contents. I hadn't missed anything on my first gander, but I did find an imprint on the underside of the section of crate I'd pried away. The logo was old and worn, yet I could make out a snake wrapped around a star with an apple in its mouth. Beneath the star, there were some Cyrillic letters, but even with the help of my phone, I couldn't make sense of them. Briefly, I again considered calling Dr. Moss. The man had spent over 30 years working in the facility and dedicated his entire life to botany. If there was anyone around who could make sense of the crate or its contents, it was him. I even pulled up his name on my contacts, but at the last second, I decided against calling. Dr. Moss and I were the last researchers left in the facility. Had it not been for his age, my contract would have been terminated before his. I had spent a measly 5 years at the Botanical Garden and knew nothing compared to his lifelong experience. He, however, was pushing 80, and the people in charge of the budget thought him a liability. Once I finished my coffee, I plucked one of the strange flowers out of the crate and made my way to the herbarium. As remote and underfunded as our facility was, our library of specimens was immense. I was sure I would find answers in the library of plants, yet even after an hour of searching, I found nothing that resembled the flower. The silver-green petals, the strange long stem, the peculiar sweaty smell of the flower. The longer I dug through the library, the more certain I was that the plant wasn't the product of natural biology. I'd almost given up on the whole affair, yet just as I was about to leave the herbarium, I remembered Dr. Moss's private collection. When he was let go, Dr. Moss told me I could have full access to his collection and notes. The injustice of his firing had kept me away from his work, yet as I stood there with the strange flower in my hand, I bit past my discomfort. Dr. Moss's private sheets held no hint of organisation, yet by sheer luck, I found an identical flower within a couple of minutes of my search. There were no labels or details about where the specimen had come from. There was only a single handwritten note pressed into the plastic. Specimen from Professor Kamer, 9th of October, 1997. The note didn't get me any closer to understanding what the flower was, or from where the crate came from. Yet those questions quickly fled my mind. Stashed in among Dr. Moss's collection, I found something that wasn't a plant. I found a photograph. It was a group shot of the research team from sunnier days taken during one of our annual barbecues in the atrium. At first, I thought the photograph must have been taken before I'd started working at the facility, yet on closer inspection, I found myself. 5 years younger, straight out of university, grinning like the good times would never pass, I found myself in the photograph. I picked up my phone and called him. The question of the flower in the mysterious crate was still lingering somewhere in the back of my mind, but it was the photograph which made me take out the phone. I found myself thinking less of Dr. Moss as a mentor and more as a retired old man who might appreciate the company. When I called, Dr. Moss was in his usual good spirits. When I mentioned the photograph, he laughed and started recollecting the barbecue as if it happened the day prior. As old as the man was, his memory was pristine. For a while, we chatted about retirement and management and how the facility was sure to close down soon enough anyway. It was only in passing that I mentioned the crate and its strange contents. Dr. Moss didn't seem to make anything of my morning, but when I mentioned Professor Kamer, his voice turned cold.
Professor Kamer?
He asked, all his good cheer disappearing. Yeah, I found his name next to a sample in...
Where is the crate now?
In the lab. Why? There was rustling on the other side of the line. I was still no wiser on the situation of the mysterious crate, but something in the depths of my stomach told me that something was wrong.
Maria, listen closely.
Dr. Moss's words were punctuated by the slamming of a car door.
You need to grab that crate, put the lid back on, and then carry it to the incinerator. I'll be with you shortly.
I didn't even know our facility had an incinerator, yet that was not my concern at that moment. The stress in Dr. Moss's voice made me beyond uneasy. Do you know what was in that crate? I asked as I made my way out of the herbarium towards the lab. The lack of immediate response made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Suddenly, the strange flowers and twigs I found in the box seemed irrelevant. It was the spongy flesh in which they were embedded that bothered me the most.
Yes,
said the voice from the phone.
The crate came from the United People's Institute of...
A hush of static ate away at his response. The phone reception in the hills, leading up to the facility, has always left a lot to be desired. Working in a remote place, one gets used to it. I didn't think it would ever bother me. As I entered the lab, however, the lack of reception sent me into a full-blown panic.
Hello?
His voice fizzled through the phone.
I think the connection dropped for a second. Can you hear me now?
The lab had grown considerably colder. My teeth refused to cooperate with my mouth. Off in the distance, the thunder of an incoming storm roared. The crate is empty.
Get out! Get out right now! That thing is dangerous!
Dr. Moss barked to the backing of a straining engine.
Meet me by the gate. Make sure the thing doesn't...
The call dropped. I didn't attempt to revive it. I was too busy sprinting for my life. Never in the 5 years I'd worked at the facility had the remote nature of my work bothered me. In fact, I found it calming to be far away from the smog and noise pollution of my city. It was nice to get to divorce myself from the hustle of the regular world and focus on the things that I'm passionate about. The sight of the facility had always calmed me, yet as I stood by its gates that morning, the visage of the botanical garden was all but tranquil. I was alone in the hills. I was alone, and I would stay alone for at least half an hour as Dr. Moss made his drive up. I tried calling him again. A couple of times the phone actually rang, but the connection was never made. It wasn't just the low coverage in the hills that was keeping me severed from the rest of the world. The storm that had been brewing all morning had finally let loose. At first I stayed out in the rain. The promise of the grey-fleshed thing lingering somewhere in the lab made getting wet an easily acceptable discomfort. As the storm picked up, however, I started to worry about my phone. It was my one sole connection to the outside world, and the prospect of it shutting off was beyond dangerous. When the rain turned so heavy that I couldn't dry my glasses, I retreated back to the facility. The torrential downpour strengthened. And the half hour which it would take Dr. Moss to drive up to the facility came and went. I kept on trying to call him, yet the phone kept on telling me that the number was unavailable. It wasn't until the rain had died down that a dial tone emerged. He still didn't pick up. I called again and again and again. The roads leading up to the facility were never particularly well maintained, and the storm would have made them harder to drive still. My mind was quickly producing images of an overturned car with Dr. Moss's phone lying somewhere in the mud covered in broken glass. With the storm having died down and the promise of help steadily dwindling, I was starting to consider simply getting in my car and summoning help myself. Yet on my 6th attempt to call Dr. Moss, I heard something beyond the dial tone. On first glance, it looked like it was coming from the atrium. At first, I noticed nothing out of the ordinary. On closer inspection, however, I glimpsed something shifting by the grill that Dr. Moss used to man during our barbecues. On first glance, it looked like a gathering of lawn trimmings with some flowers and branches thrown in. Both the flowers and shrubbery denied any classification. Yet the pile was motionless and seemed harmless enough. For a moment, I started to question whether I had not simply poured out the contents of the crate in the atrium and forgotten about it. Yet then, with a disturbing fluidity, the pile of foliage started to shift around. As the creature squirmed, it revealed its true nature. The shrubbery shifted to reveal a sea of beady, yellow eyeballs. They shifted towards the grill and regarded the can of lighter fluid with utter fascination. As if trying to speak to it, the creature spread out its fat, drooping lips in terrible vocalization. There was something patently wrong with the creature I was looking at. I was sure of that. Yet even past the fear and disgust, I was still a scientist. I could not deny my curiosity. I stepped to the window to get a closer look at the creature. The focus of my studies has always been with plants, but I was sure that even an expert taxonomist couldn't make sense of the mumbling madness in the atrium. The creature resembled something akin to a jellyfish, yet it seemed to take in the world through reptilian eyes. The mere existence of the beast was concerning enough, but what made the sight truly disturbing were the creature's lips. They resembled primate lips, though swollen and sickly and attached to a being wholly not of the natural world. The lips looked human. The question of what happened to Dr. Moss had temporarily left my head. I was far too fascinated with the monstrosity in the atrium. It wasn't until my phone rang that my attention shifted. Very quickly, the attention of the creature shifted as well. The thing went silent. Its symphony of yellowed eyes focused in on me. With a long, laboured motion, the being started to suck at its lower lip. Before I had a chance to answer my phone, a hard chunk of spit left the creature's mouth. The glass wall of the atrium shattered. Baptized in sharp crystals, I fell to the floor. I tried getting back up, but I was far too dizzy with shock, and all my palms could reach was crushed glass. With the grey-skinned creature quickly approaching and chewing at its lip once more, I reached the closest thing I had to defend myself with, the lid of the crates. The wood sustained the creature's missile with a gentle dent, yet soon enough the worn logo of the star and snake started to melt away. Whatever the creature was spitting was highly corrosive. The creature's spit was acid. The creature's spit was acid, and it was crawling straight towards me. With its mouth preparing for another poisonous ball of phlegm, I was certain my death was near. With its yellow eyes glued to me, the creature chewed and crawled. But then, with the blunt force of a shovel, I was saved. The old man must have left his house the moment I called, for he was still wearing his pajama shirt. With a range of motion wholly unnatural for an 8-year-old, Dr. Moss swung the shovel over and over, crushing and cutting the creature beneath its blade. The grey-fleshed beast quickly went limp, yet my relief did not last. As Dr. Moss plunged the shovel into the creature, the tool started to wear away. The corrosive blood of the abomination was eating away at the shovel.
Lighter fluid!
Dr. Moss screamed as he swung the shovel once more.
Bring the lighter fluid!
With great difficulty and bleeding palms, I got to my feet and sprinted to the door leading to the atrium. With the shovel corroded down to a rake, I wasted no time in pouring the accelerant. After a couple more laboured swings of the destroyed tool, Dr. Moss produced a lighter and put the beast's cries to an end. I immediately started demanding that Dr. Moss explain the nature of the abomination to me, but it quickly became apparent that the old man was in no position to shed light on anything. Although he saved me, the shovel fight had taken its toll on Dr. Moss. He was having a heart attack. Getting him to the hospital on the slick roads was beyond nerve-wracking, but I did take comfort in putting distance between me and the unexplainable creature. The whole way through, Dr. Moss kept telling me to make sure I burn the creature. He kept saying that it was never meant to exist. He kept saying that the evidence of the creature had to be destroyed. The last thing I wanted to do was return to the facility, let alone handle the creature. Yet with the little consciousness Dr. Moss still possessed, he made me promise that I would. And in complete silence, I drove back to the botanical garden once more. To my utter relief, I found the burnt remnants of the creature exactly where we had left them, sprawled out in a pool of black gunk and shattered glass. With the utmost caution, I scooped up the evidence with a new shovel from the tool shed, loaded it back into the crate, and incinerated it all. Because I'm not family, the hospital won't provide me with any details about Dr. Moss, but from the sounds of it, he's alive. It's far too late to visit now, but I hope that soon I'll get to talk to him. I hope that soon I'll get my answers to why that crate arrived at our facility.
And so concludes another episode of the United People's Institute series. Next Thursday comes a tale of the early 2000s, Botanical Gardens, and Pokemon, read by Abby from the Dark Room podcast. If you can't wait a full week for another episode, drop by patreon.com/MikeJLanger for the full 20-story season and a bunch of other early and bonus content. Also, if you haven't heard the first season of the United People's Institute series, there's a big old jumbo video of it down in the pinned comment for binge consumption. Big old thanks to Abby for lending her voice to the tale, Christopher Hugh James Adamson for providing additional dialogue, and Repulsive for lending the spooky tunes. If you made it this far into the video, tell me what you were up to in the early 2000s. Who knows, maybe a bit of your story will worm itself into another tale on the channel. And finally, As usual, a huge thanks to the patrons for making the show possible. Big old thanks to Bob Conderg, Dante Kincaid, Matt, Joyce, Miss CreepyPasta, Kus, Christopher Barunda, Dying Sun, Charlie Cooper, Paul, Paul Evans, Quiet Pills, Shion, and Benoit Chamino. If you want to join these illustrious scientific minds, drop by patreon.com/MikeJLanger. That's it for me this week. Hope everyone is safe, sane, and healthy out there.